So I've been told most of my life that the religious nuts, zealots, and suicide bombers are Muslims, and they don't respect life, and they want to kill everybody, and you too. And but it seems to me that this has really been a propaganda from the Zionists and Israel to get Christians and Muslims fighting each other, so that exactly what is they could happen is that Israel could take over the Middle East and get the United States out of there. So how does so does it seems obvious. So it's like I always say, I'm a C student, so if I can figure this out, I know they know this stuff. So how does the United States not know that Israel really wants them out of there? How do they not know that Israel really wants us fighting their wars with Muslims, and that they're really not our enemy because they weren't? How does this again, like, if I know this, how do they not know it, and why would Donald Trump and everybody right now who's in charge of things, who's people who are above Donald Trump, why would they allow us to be kicked out of the Middle East like that and give it over to Israel?
Right. So I think the main reason is that these religious fanatics have spent centuries planting the seeds, embedding themselves into power so that they would control all levels of power in the Western world. So let me give you an example of this. It's always been assumed that Jeffrey Epstein was a Mossad agent responsible for a honeypot operation on his island. Bill Gates, Bill Clinton would go and he would film them in compromising positions, and then he would blackmail them. But if you actually read the Epstein emails, what you would recognize is that he wasn't actually doing blackmail. In fact, these very famous, powerful people like Bill Gates, Elon Musk, they were trying to become his friend. Bill Gates was asked, "Why were you hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein?" And Bill Gates' response was, "Well, I was trying to get money from him for my foundation." And that sounds kind of weird. Like, you're the richest man in the world. Why are you begging Jeffrey Epstein for money? And the answer is that because Jeffrey Epstein was an operative for a very powerful organization. The emails don't tell us what the organization is, but look, he was involved in Libya. He was involved in the great financial crisis. He seemed to have a pulse of all geopolitical events. And he said that, you know what, if we can anticipate geopolitical events, we can make a lot of money. But that can also mean that if we can manipulate geopolitical events, we can make a lot of money. There are rumors that he was somehow involved in 9/11 as well, because we only have access to at most 50% of his emails. Then you ask yourself, what organization would he represent? And the closest speculation, okay, and again, this is speculation, is the possibility that he was a representative, a political operative of the Chabad Lubavitch, which Tucker Carlson mentioned in a monologue a few days ago. Chabad Lubavitch has been around for a couple of centuries, and they are Messianic Jews who want to usher in the end times. And another piece of evidence to suggest that Chabad Lubavitch is very powerful is that Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of Donald Trump, he is a Chabad Lubavitch family. His entire family is part of this movement based in Brooklyn. And what is Jared Kushner doing now? Well, he and Steve Witkoff are Trump's envoys to peace in Ukraine, right? Then they went to Russia to negotiate peace with Putin. Then they went to Ukraine to negotiate peace with Zelensky. They're very close to Netanyahu. And during these Iran negotiations, they were Trump's peace envoys. But during the negotiations, Steve Witkoff went on TV and said that he suspects the Iranians are a couple of weeks away from weapons-grade uranium enrichment, which for him is to say that the Iranians are negotiating in bad faith. So he wasn't looking to reach an agreement with the Iranians. He was looking to sabotage, torpedo negotiations. And so, is it possible that Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, they are trying to manipulate geopolitical events in a certain way that achieves their eschatology, that they are operatives of religious individuals, and there's a script in place, and they're just the actors in this script. So the Chabad Lubavitch movement is something that we can look at. also the Freemasons, right? Because the Freemasons are the ones who control the national security apparatus in America. And a third of US presidents have been Freemasons. The most famous Freemason, of course, was Harry S. Truman. He was a 33rd degree Freemason, the highest level of Freemason. He was the 33rd president of the United States. And he was the one who ordered the dropping of nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which sit on the 33rd latitude. So are all these coincidence? I'm not really sure, okay? But it seems as though there are very powerful people who are extremely religious, and they believe that they've uncovered God's plan. And they are patiently, methodically embedding themselves into power so that they can achieve their eschatology. And they feel as though this is the moment. This is the moment we've been waiting for 500 years. And another 5-10 years, and we will achieve our plan. And that's why we see so much anxiety in the world. That's why we see so much desperation in the world right now.
And so, can you? What is the so? If Kushner and Witkoff are negotiating with Russia and Ukraine, and also with Iran and Israel in the Middle East, and they are part of this Shabbat Lubavitch, which wants to bring about the end times. Tell me the connection then between Russia and Ukraine and what's happening right now with the Israel, United States, and Iran.
Okay, so again, this is speculation. But one possible connection is this. The war in Ukraine was started in order to initiate World War III, in order to compel, force an American response, right? Because if the war in Ukraine is successful, then Russia would control 1/3 of the world's carbohydrates and much of the world's energy resources. Another thing that's very important is that the war in Ukraine would severely damage the European economy. And you could argue from a conspiratorial perspective that was intentional. Why? Because in the Shabbat Lubavitch eschatology, Europe is the great enemy. Why? Because if we go back 2,000 years, the Jews and the Romans were great adversaries. And so the Romans need to be destroyed. They need to be avenged because it was the Romans who destroyed the Second Temple. And who are the heirs and the ancestors? The descendants of the Romans? Western Europe, right? So you see this massive influx of Islamic refugees into Western Europe. That's causing a lot of social disunity, a lot of social conflict. And you ask yourself, were they really that silly as to not know that all these millions and millions of Muslim immigrants would destroy their social fabric? Okay, so again, this is all speculation, all right? But that's a connection between Ukraine and this eschatology. Now, because of this war in Ukraine, the Americans are forced to respond by invading Iran. There's another connection in that Turkey
So wait, can I just stop? Are you saying that part of the calculation for the United States to attack Iran was the fact that Russia is winning the war in Ukraine?
Yes.
Those are connected?
Right. So let me explain. For 20 years, the Anglo-American Empire had a very basic understanding of the world. The Anglo-American Empire is low population, the rest of the world is high population. So how do you maintain your empire throughout the entire world? Well, you do so by controlling sea lanes for trade purposes. But what this means is that you can never allow a power to emerge in Eurasia that could unify the Eurasian continent and create a trade bloc that is continental, which can negate Anglo-American sea power. Okay, this is called the Mackinder thesis. And so people believe that's why America entered World War I and World War II, because the great fear is that Germany could unify Eurasia and create this continental trade bloc. And so Anglo-American Empire is heavily invested in creating as much disunity, chaos, and conflict as much as possible in Europe and in Asia. So if Russia is able to conquer Ukraine and Russia is able to control carbohydrates and energy and resources, then what Russia can do is then have a trade bloc agreement with Iran and China. And that would create this Eurasian heartland that would negate American sea power and basically cause the US dollar to collapse in value. And this $40 trillion debt that America has would just blow up in the face of America, leading to widespread depression and unrest. So the argument is that America invaded Iran in order to make sure that this massive trade bloc between Russia, Iran, and China could not emerge. And that's a very rather, and that's why they had to go in and start this war.
So okay, that's still so. But so how does then Venezuela? So do you think Venezuela was because? So how does Venezuela fit into this?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so um, so Trump is not actually interested in this eschatology. He himself has a different understanding of the world, which is America first. But America first doesn't mean you end empire. America first just means you change the nature and structure of the empire. So America first means we don't want to involve ourselves in the Middle East anymore. Let's just stick to the Western Hemisphere, the Monroe Doctrine or the Donroe Doctrine, and have control over the resources of the Western Hemisphere. And then we no longer have to deal with the rest of the world. We no longer have to fight these sandbox wars. So and that's why Trump is threatening Greenland, Canada, Mexico, Colombia, Cuba. I mean, it's all part of his larger vision. Venezuela was almost like a trap where maybe these foreign policy hawks, neocons, convinced him to go into Venezuela, and it would be a quick and easy win, and it was. And because it was such a quick and easy win, that made Trump too arrogant. It gave him hubris and believed that, you know what, the American military, battle force, they're invincible. So if I can do that in Venezuela, I can do that in Iran as well. So that's why they had to do Venezuela first, to convince Trump that Iran was doable. Another reason why they did Venezuela is at the end of the month, Trump will visit China. And what Trump wants to do is negotiate a grand bargain with China to maintain the current world order, where America is at the top. And so what Trump needs to do is basically economically strangle China in order to force China to concede to American demands. Basically, what America wants is for China to save the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. And you do that if China uses its excess household savings to continue to buy US dollars, which is a Ponzi scheme.
So what is the leverage that Donald Trump has over China to get them to go? So is he going to now substitute Venezuelan oil for Iranian oil? What is his leverage? I don't.
Right. So before, China was getting its oil from a variety of places. The reality is that China is dependent on oil exports to fuel its manufacturing economy. It imports about 75% of oil. And it was only getting about 1% of its oil from Venezuela. It's getting it's getting about 40% of its oil from the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, so not just Iran, but the entire GCC area, Qatar as well. Now you've cut off a major supply network for the Chinese. Now the thing is, the Chinese are pragmatic. So what Trump will say to the Chinese is, you know, I'm sorry about this war in the Middle East. I'm sorry you've lost your oil, but America can sell you oil. The Western Hemisphere, Canada, America, Mexico can sell you oil. How about that? And in this instance, it's almost a fait accompli where China is forced to say yes, because again, China is pragmatic. China is a nation of business people.
And so you think they'll go, okay, well, do whatever you want with Iran, and we'll buy your oil instead? You think that's what they'll do?
Well, again, the Chinese are pragmatic and strategic. So yes, they will agree to this deal, but they will also continue to support Iran with the hope that Iran wins this war and then is able to control the Middle East and therefore supply China with oil. Okay, so another way of saying this is that, you know, China could, in theory, get most of its oil supply from Russia, which is an ally. The problem with that is that you set yourself up for long-term risk. Russia could choose to up the price of its oil. So something could happen to Russia, which would disrupt oil supply. Pipeline can be blown up, right? So the Chinese are pragmatic. They want to have multiple trade partners, and they are not ideological. They're perfectly happy to trade with the Iranians, with the Americans, with the Chinese, whoever gives them the best price. And so for their national strategic interest, it's very important to have multiple trade partners and multiple sources of resources.
So, do you think this was part of the calculation for Donald Trump to attack Iran? Was that to get the upper hand on China in a way, and that we could then start controlling their oil supply?
I think Donald Trump doesn't think geopolitically. I don't think he thinks strategically. He thinks in terms of television. There are advisors who believe this, but Donald Trump is just interested in good TV. And Venezuela made great TV that distracted people from the Epstein files. So his advisors were like, Iran will make even better TV when we go decapitate the Ayatollah, and when the Iranians cheer on the streets for regime change, when they shout your name in the streets of Tehran. That's what he was probably told, and he believed it.